Grenade by Alan Gratz, Part 1, pages 114 through 120. Hideki. Yokai. Hideki's foot stuck in the mud. He tugged and tugged on it until his foot came right out of his boot. It took him ages to dig his boot out of the darkness. When he could finally walk again, Hideki staggered to the top of a hill and stopped for a minute, bone weary. He had to travel by night. That was the only time the American battleships stopped shelling the island. Hideki made sure he was still pointed toward the dark silhouette of Shuri Castle in the distance. If Shuri Castle was still standing, the Americans couldn't be winning too much. Hideki felt a swell of pride at that. As long as Shuri Castle still stood, so too did Okinawa. Hideki took another step forward and his feet went out from under him. He fell on his back and suddenly he was tumbling and sliding down a steep, muddy slope. He crashed into the shattered remains of tree stumps but bounced off them, was lashed by saplings but couldn't grab them. There was nothing he could do to stop his long, dizzying barrel roll down the hill until he plunged headfirst into a pool of mud. Hideki's skin crawled, and with a horrified yelp, he realized he was covered in maggots. They were in his hair and inside his shirt and down his pants. Hideki screamed and scrambled away, tearing at his clothes. He stripped off his shirt and his shoes and pants and both socks, even the shorts he wore as underpants. Hideki ran his shaking hands over every inch of his body, now glad for the pounding, incessant rain that washed him clean. His skin still crawled, and his shuddering turned into a constant tremble in the cold rain. Hideki wrapped his arms around himself and shivered, but he would not put his clothes back on, not with them covered in maggots. Hideki had never felt so naked before, so utterly helpless and exposed. Everything he was, the person he had been, all of it had been stripped away. He was nothing. Nobody. He was a ghost. Hideki's ceramic grenades glistened in the mud. Miraculously, they hadn't cracked in the fall. Hideki remembered Lieutenant Colonel Sano's words to him and all the other boys. "One grenade is for the American monsters coming to kill your family. You are to use the other grenade to kill yourself." Hideki hadn't used either of his grenades. He'd been too frightened to throw one at the Americans. Might be too frightened to ever throw one at the Americans. Did that mean he should use one on himself here and now, the way Lieutenant Colonel Sano had told him? Hideki wanted to. No, that wasn't true. He didn't want to be here now. He didn't want to be naked and shivering and afraid, but he didn't want to die. And if he used his grenade on himself, he could never fulfill his promise to his father to find his sister. Still shivering, Hideki picked up the sack with the photos of His Majesty the Emperor. Some pictures had fallen out and he had no hope of finding them, but he saved what he could. The sack and his 2 grenades were all he took with him. Hideki trudged on until he heard voices in the darkness. Foreign voices. Americans. Will they even see me? Hideki wondered. Am I really a ghost? But no, he must be alive. Not even death could be this cold. Hideki gave the American camp a wide berth, his eyes searching the darkness for anything that might give him shelter or warmth. There, a blacker spot in the darkness. Was that the opening of a cave? So close to the American camp? Hideki staggered over to it. "Yokai!" someone whispered at him out of the darkness. Hideki froze. Yokai was the Japanese word for a spirit, a ghost. I'm not a yokai," Hideki said, his teeth chattering. What is the password?" the voice said. Hideki suddenly understood. The man was a Japanese soldier, and yokai was the challenge word of the day. If Hideki wanted to come through, he had to know the response. "Yuta?" Hideki guessed. Suddenly a Japanese guard stuck a rifle in his face. Hideki had guessed wrong. The soldier snatched Hideki's grenades and led him into the cave at gunpoint. A covered light helped Hideki's eyes adjust, and he saw the floor of the main cavern was filled with wounded Japanese soldiers. More IJA soldiers with rifles squatted here and there, and at the back of the cave, huddled together, were 10 Okinawans, mostly women and children. "Who's this?" an IJA lieutenant demanded. An Okinawan boy. I caught him outside, said Hideki's captor. He didn't know the password. He had these grenades on him. I think he's a spy. I'm not a spy, Hideki cried. My name is Hideki Kaneshiro. I'm a member of the Blood and Iron Student Corps, and look! He opened the sack of photos he carried. I've been protecting images of His Majesty the Emperor. The lieutenant nodded his approval. All right, get a new uniform over there. The corner the lieutenant pointed to was stacked with the bodies of dead Japanese soldiers. He meant for Hideki to take the clothes off a dead man. Hideki did as he was told. He found a jacket and pants that fit him if he rolled up the cuffs. The pants had bullet holes in them, but at least they were warm. He found a helmet too, but none of the dead soldiers had shoes small enough for Hideki's feet. He went barefoot instead. Water. Bring us water, one of the injured soldiers moaned. Another grabbed at Hideki's trouser legs. Get over here, the lieutenant barked at Hideki. We're planning an attack. An attack? On who? The Americans? But that was crazy. There were only 7 healthy soldiers, including the lieutenant. The wounded men need water, Hideki told the lieutenant. Don't waste your time on them, the lieutenant said. They'll be dead soon anyway. The time has come for a counterattack. There is an American camp nearby. We will leave the cave and surprise them just before dawn. Hideki couldn't believe what he was hearing. But the Americans have lots more men than we do, he told the officers. They'll kill us all. The lieutenant ignored him. Issue grenades to the wounded soldiers who can't march and tell them to kill themselves when we're gone. They are not to be captured by the enemy. Any soldier who can walk comes with us on the attack. It's still not enough, Hideki argued. Be quiet, the lieutenant cried. He struck Hideki across the face with the back of his hand, sending Hideki to the floor. Junior officers will speak only when spoken to. The lieutenant turned to one of his men. Get the Okinawans, he said. We'll strap explosives to them and send them out ahead of us. Hideki watched, aghast, as 2 of the soldiers dragged an Okinawan woman and her baby out of the corner. The woman was wearing a beautiful bushofu kimono with white flowers on it. How had she managed to keep it so clean so long while a battle was raging all around them? Hideki had no idea. Hideki blinked. Suddenly, he saw the woman as though she and her kimono had been tinted by a photographer, the only spot of color painted on a black and white photograph of the war. And then the soldiers tied a belt of dynamite around her waist. Hideki lurched forward, trying to stop them. No, you can't! They're not soldiers! The lieutenant shoved Hideki back and pulled out his pistol. You will fight! You will all fight! This is your island, after all! The lieutenant spat. Hideki was still reeling as the lieutenant slapped the ceramic grenades back into Hideki's hands. You should all be the ones dying to defend it, not us. This was crazy. Hideki slipped the grenades into his jacket pockets and staggered back, looking for someplace to run, someplace to hide. But there was no other exit from the cave. The lieutenant pointed his pistol at them all, Okinawans and Japanese alike. Now attack! The lieutenant screamed. For Japan! For the Emperor! Attack!